Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guests today are Dr. Pragyansmita Nayak. She's the Chief Data Scientist at Hitachi Vantara Federal. And also from Hitachi Vantara Federal, Gary Hicks, the Chief Technology Officer, and Carrie Connert, the Senior Director of Services and Delivery. And our topic today is data scientists getting the best use of data for federal agencies, how to best realize value from analytics. And why don't we start with the chief data officers themselves and their staffs, the data officers. What are their chief challenges for them and for the mission owners that this whole data operation is really designed to serve? Gary?
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Thanks for having us on. I think one of the things as I go out and talk to customers and other CTOs, the challenges that we tend to see are really around getting access to industry tools in a quick manner. One of the things, the typical government procurement cycle is 12 to 18 months. If you look at it, and data has such a short shelf life and its validity in a lot of times, and quickness that they want to get to those tools and that data and use it. And what I see is a lot of agencies looking towards using things like OTAs, other transactional authorities, to get quicker access, especially since a lot of the time this is a research or co-development activity with a lot of these data analytic challenges and use cases. And I don't know, Carrie, what you've seen in the market as well.
Thanks, Gary. In addition to the procurement challenges, one of the other biggest challenges I've seen and I've heard in talking with a lot of our mission partners is having the advocates, knowing who your advocates are that understand the value of the data and those that can help you drive the value out of that data. So it really goes down to, do you have the right people? You need to have the people who not only understand the data you have, where it exists, where it lives, but also how to get the most out of that data. They need to have expertise to leverage the tools that are available, or maybe identify tools that you need to get the data to work for you, so that you can map and curate the data effectively and get to a place where that data becomes actionable for you. Dr. P, I think, what about from a technical perspective?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Gary and Carrie, and thank you, Tom, for having us. Totally resonating with what Gary and Carrie have mentioned. And from the technical side, what I have seen is there is a significant challenge in trying to map the mission and vision of an agency or a sub-agency to a specific data problem or a number of data problems. And this carries on even like when you start looking at a specific problem, it becomes, solution becomes tools driven rather than being problem driven. So having a challenge in terms of being able to define why are you doing it. So understanding your why is more critical in terms of solution development. And that naturally leads to the problem that exists, that there is a lack of a shared language, or there's a challenge in having a shared language which the technologists can talk to the stakeholders, to the decision makers, and the people who are actually using the system. And that naturally there's a significant challenge with data curation and tagging and the whole problem space around that.
Yeah, so the implication then is that this is not simply a problem that is choosing how to do the best data analytics for the chief data officers and their staffs, but it sounds like you really need to have the mission owners involved, because the whys and the questions that we're trying to answer, what are we trying to achieve here, is something that belongs at that level, or at least that level has to be involved in getting to that, the right data and right data analytics.
Yeah, it becomes a you've rightfully mentioned, like it becomes a decision engineering problem actually. You need to understand getting the data owners and the mission owners together so that they are using data science and analytics as a decision making tool. That in turn leads to it becoming a systems engineering problem that should take care that there is evolving scalability and resilience in the solution that you're developing. And as you can imagine, data science by itself is made up of a number of things, such as starting from data visualization that you use like all through the different phases of a solution development, to advanced analytics, like using machine learning, artificial intelligence, natural language processing. So based on the problem that you're trying to address, there are different components of the data science space that one needs to use. Certain use cases where it has been very effectively used is, for example, the US Army is using it for the predictive maintenance of vehicles. NASA is looking at using it for the maintenance activities that is happening in the International Space Station. So things that will reduce the life risks that one puts the astronauts in, but being able to use certain type of robotic process automation instead. The Caterpillar has used uh, analytics and machine learning to get better at optimized hull cleaning of the ships. They have found that if you do the cleaning more frequently, which you would think will add more cost, but instead it helps them save certain like $500,000 per year if they do it every 6 months compared to 2 years. So you can see like there are certain things which are simple things but can give you big returns. So Gary and Kerry, would you like to add certain
Yeah, I
experience?
would. And I think your use cases are, and we've seen even more use cases in the near past with the COVID and supply chain and management of all the vaccines. And you kind of talked about artificial intelligence. I when I think of artificial intelligence, all this data that's out there for those program owners, I think about it as in terms of broad analysis of all that data. It's I kind of equivalent when you were a kid, you go into 7-Eleven and you'd go to the soda machine, take a little bit from each one, and that's really what you're doing with AI. You're taking all these data elements and just putting them together and see what comes out. What trends you can see, what you can identify. And I think a lot of the challenges of the program managers, they know they have the data, but they don't necessarily know how to kind of put it all together and use that. So, and I think it's finding the people are the real challenging places that Carrie can talk more about.
Yeah, Carrie, I was going to ask you, in your visits and discussions with agencies as the director of services and delivery, do you find that those people needed to be involved in getting to the right solution are in fact involved? The program people, the mission owners?
Sometimes yes, and sometimes no. It all depends on the environment. It depends on the organization. It also depends on the maturity of that organization in attempting to leverage the data and start analyzing the data and using it for effective decision making. A lot of these places that a lot of the folks that I've talked to, the biggest hurdle is really knowing where to start. Where do how do you understand the data that's in front of you and start to take what seems very overwhelming and very complex to a place where you can get what you need out of it? So really it goes back to, starting simple, starting with the data owners, looking at data as a powerful and very valuable tool and deciding, what is it that you're lacking? What are those big decisions that you need to make that you could really leverage more data, more information, better analytics to help you make those decisions? And then, you start to look at, do I have the right people in place to drive that process, to drive that thinking? So not just, you think about the decision engineering piece of it. There's the part of it that is understanding and curating the data, but then it's, what do you do with that data? How do you make the most of it and drive the analytics that you need that are going to help you then inform your decisions, for whatever area of the business is necessary? And that goes back to what Gary was talking about and what Dr. P was talking about, those use cases. It's really understanding what's out there and then applying what you need and then bringing it together. And it really depends on having those people with that insight and then the analytical abilities. Sometimes they're in the organization, sometimes they have to go outside or hire and make it a priority.
All right, so that brings us back to one of the use cases that Dr. P described. I'd like to rewind it and maybe look a little bit closer at it. You said that by changing the frequency of hull scrubbing, that the ship budget can be lowered by $500,000 a year. It costs $1 billion to keep a warship going, so every million counts. Tell us more about that. What kinds of data, for example, in a case like that, would be coming into the problem solving, and how did that whole analytical exercise work?
Sure. Yes, definitely. So in that case, what they had done was they heavily utilized the sensors measurements. The ship has, you can imagine, thousands and thousands of sensors which are performing all types of measurements and gathering the data on a continuous basis. So leveraging that data was the very first step, where they used it to better understand as to what was the fuel efficiency and the various efficiencies in the ship's operation, and then determining that if you do the cleaning on X schedule, what is the performance improvement that they are seeing versus doing it on a different schedule. And that's when they identified, and let me look at my notes because I do have the numbers where it said that, so if they cleaned it every 6.2 months versus 2 years, they were saving up to $500,000 per ship. So you can imagine how that adds up when you have a fleet of ships in your maintenance schedule. And the additional advantage was that they use the same data to also understand the how efficient the generators were. And they realized that if they run more generators at lower power, it is more efficient than running lesser number of generators at higher power. So these were the additional, you can see the buildup of the data analytics advantages happening there.
Yeah, so the implication in a case like that is you have to be very careful of the assumptions that you bring in, because they could well be disproven. And so you can't start with kind of a preconceived or expected outcome to an analytic exercise, correct?
Indeed, indeed. And Gary, would you like to add
Yeah.
some information in terms of
Yeah, I
the?
was just going to Hitachi Vantara Federal is in a unique position because our parent company, Hitachi Limited, is the GE of Japan. They're 112 years old at this point. And what they have is all of that institutional knowledge around operational technology. So all these sensors that are on these ships, trains, MRIs, whatever it may be, if you look at our entire portfolio at the Hitachi Limited level, 963 companies, there's a plethora of data that they're used to dealing with. So they have historical knowledge and trends that they can build into these algorithms, knowing, the sensors of, if we scrape the barnacles off the ship, we're going to get better generator life, better, propeller life. We're going to get better fuel use. So they have this 100 years of technology history that they can rely on to really drive that use case and get quicker to the desired outcome that a company like Caterpillar is looking for.
All right. On that note, we'll take a short break. And I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. This discussion is Digital Discovery, the future of maximizing your return on data, sponsored by Hitachi Vantara Federal here on Federal News Network.